glad to, and honored to be with Chris on here on this presentation, but also Terri, with your group as well. It's just it's a great honor because I know you stepped out of kind of higher ed academia to do this. It's anybody who does that, you can tell it's a great passion of theirs. So thank you for doing that and all the great work you do and for asking us to do this today. So, with the current situation with study abroad, there are a lot of things to think about, of course. And one of the things that you're talking about are super important. How do we teach intercultural competencies, possibly without maybe going on location abroad? And it's difficult for us to think about this, but really we have to start thinking less about the location, but more about the person. And before I go any further, I just want to double check, is audio sounding okay, Terri?
Yeah, it's great. Thanks.
Perfect. So why did I choose a PhD in intercultural communication? That is because there came a point in my doctoral work where I really wanted to be a mentor. I wanted to be able to teach this stuff and work with students and communication, and had to decide if I was going to focus on interpersonal or intercultural communication. And it's kind of funny and it's kind of strange in a way, probably, but I thought, you know what? There are greater travel opportunities if I study intercultural communication. And there are much greater reasons that I've learned over time why I'm in this field. But there was a moment where that was one of my reasons. But what's interesting is I found myself in this challenging situation. And if you've ever led study abroad, which I've led some study abroad opportunities for students when I was a professor for 14 years. And so during that period, when I would initiate a study abroad opportunity for students, there was always this paperwork to fill out. And I think, as a lot of us who have worked in study abroad before know, that sometimes school administrators believe that study abroad is just this simple kind of go play, have fun, do cool things internationally. And there are definitely some really great benefits of being a part of an international education program. However, there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of processes to go through behind the scenes to make sure that everybody's safe, that everybody is taken care of, that things are done correctly. And so I always came to this challenging question in our paperwork that I had to fill out for the university. And they would ask, can this content be learned in a traditional classroom? And, if you're like me, it's a moment of truth, because yes, probably the content, whatever it was, could be taught in the classroom. But I'd kind of like to go teach it somewhere else, right? I would like to be able to go to Rome or go to Venice or go to Paris and teach these concepts about intercultural competency and intercultural communication, international business, those types of subjects. I would like to go teach them in Paris, because that sounds kind of fun. It sounds more fun than possibly doing that in my classroom. So, I always felt like, okay, do I put yes here? If I put yes here, am I less likely to get to do this? Like, what's the catch? And so, I think a lot of us, if we ask ourselves why we do study abroad work, well, I think a lot of us would say, I do it because I want to influence a student's ability to develop cross-culturally. So student intercultural competency development. Now, the interesting thing right now is that COVID-19 has called our bluff. Is that really our altruistic motive here? And on one hand, it is. Yes, I mean, if you've led study abroad before, and I'm sure a lot of you listening have, it is so fun to get to not only mentor students on campus, but to get to mentor students internationally, especially students who've never left the country, and to see them for the first time begin to kind of move beyond some of the initial anxieties and to experience other cultures and to realize things and to think, okay, so what I thought to be true all these years maybe I'm just kind of shaking this up a little bit, and I'm okay with that. I'm thinking about this. They're processing this. That's really rich. But again, going back to that question, can that content be learned in the traditional classroom? So again, COVID-19 has called our bluff on this. Do we really have to do an international experience with the students in order to teach intercultural competencies for those students? And I think that's where, going back to this idea, it's less about the location and it's more about the person or the student. So universities now, administrators and students are now expecting intercultural competency development to be accessible. And so even if there's a no departure, if there's not a flight somewhere, we want on-campus accountability. Is this going to happen on campus as well or instead of? They want this process to be immediate, but also ongoing. So not just a one-time experience, but ongoing, and for it to be kind of available anytime, anywhere. And so we're looking at kind of app-based solutions, as well as not only how do we teach competencies on campus, but how do we do that in a streamlined way so that, case in point, right now, if a student is no longer able to come to campus, can he or she still access those learning modules and things wherever, whenever? So some examples of some schools who are doing this and really thriving in this. Guilford College, there are different rating systems out there. One rating system ranked Guilford College in one of the top 5 study abroad programs in the nation. It's not by the sheer size of their program. It's not a huge school, but just the quality of their programming. And they have begun to launch an on-campus intercultural competency assessment and education initiative. Oklahoma State University has implemented an online intercultural competency program. The University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. I know, Terri, you mentioned earlier, main campus in Austin, University of Texas. But Rio Grande Valley has a significant, as you can imagine, they're right on the Mexico-US border. A large percentage of their students literally come across the border on a daily basis for class. And so they implemented a program and saw a 9% improvement in intercultural competency over a single semester on campus. So for students engaging cross-culturally, they were able to see an incredible impact on their student body, and the students didn't have to travel to Paris or those types of things. So can it be taught in the traditional, or sometimes we call online, even classroom now? Can intercultural competency be taught in this way without having to go on location? Well, we've actually been looking at this for quite some time. Pictured here with me is Dr. Carly Dodd, one of the leading scholars in intercultural communication and competency research. And Carly is in his 70s now. He was a professor in this area for 47 years prior to retirement. And he launched, the last part of his career, launched a significant research initiative to be able to help us better understand an individual's cross-cultural skills, aptitudes, those types of things, be able to assess that and then train people in those things, whether or not they go on location or they study abroad, for example. And so during that 20-year research initiative, I was involved with him for about 15 years on that project. So 20 years of research, development, and testing actually does confirm that it can be taught, intercultural competencies can be taught on campus or an online school situation. And so at GoCulture, this is some of the stuff that we actually do. So through your app on a phone, we're able to do assessment, give scores, provide video training, coaching, hands-on activities, give data, podcast, certification for students, journaling, all these things. And what we're finding is that if we can assess students, plus provide coaching for them all in a scalable, handheld, through an app process, then we can see a much greater return on that investment of time for those students. So without having to necessarily take them abroad, we can still influence their intercultural competency and provide data to show the impact that we are having as a department. I think right now, a lot of study abroad departments and schools are going to struggle with justifying kind of their place in the university, and that's going to be tough because if international travel is slow to come back, it may or may not be, but if it is slow to come back, how do we as a department within a school, how do we know we can say, hey, we're still going to influence the student body, maybe not just the 100 students who went to study abroad, but we can actually teach intercultural competency across the entire campus. That's our wheelhouse, right? As a study abroad department, we know how to do that. And so there are tools out there to be able to do assessment and coaching and training and certification for the entire student body without those students having to actually pack up, pay the money, and go abroad. So there are some good news. There are some solutions available to be able to do this. And as Terri mentioned earlier, I'm going to hang around here for a little bit, and after following Chris, if I have some time, answer some questions. My email address, though, is here on screen. You can email me with questions as well. And if I can stick around a little bit longer, I want to. So, but with that, I want to turn over either to Terri or to Chris for kind of the next step here.
Sure. And if you'll stop your share, I'll go ahead and introduce Chris.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks a lot. That's great. I already have lots of things I want to discuss about that. But let's go ahead and transition to Chris. And if you'll introduce yourself. And if do you have a PowerPoint to share?
No, I'm just, it's all coming from the heart here.
Perfect.
Terri.
Then I'll just put up our bio of you so people can see that. Perfect. Thanks.
Splendid. Well, thanks very much, both Terri and Justin. It's an honor to be here and to be unpacking what we're all going through at the moment and looking at towards what might be new normal. And I think it's really powerful and really important to be having these discussions, be they online, in person. Obviously, it's not possible at the moment, but I applaud Terri for what she's doing here. And again, I would say it's an honor to be co-presenting with Justin. Everywhere I go, his name is mentioned in a positive light, should I say? So it's great to be here. As Terri mentioned, my name is Chris Lawler. I'm the CEO of a boutique provider. We're based in Ireland and we offer programming across Ireland, UK, the continent of Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and also through partners in East and Southeast Asia. We deliver customized faculty-led programming. That's what we started off doing, but we also now do research programs for our partners, semester programs, and also a lot of experiential internship and service learning programs. And we tend to work with a smaller number of universities, mostly in the States, and work much deeper. We're a relationship-based organization. And as such, I think one of the key things that we do on a day-to-day basis for all of our teams is listen. And I think our industry, our sector is built on interpersonal relationships. And I think the interesting piece and the slightly ironic piece is listening to Justin there speaking about, how we can teach intercultural competence at a distance. It almost seems like something that is a contradiction in terms, but it isn't. And it's also the bedrock upon which our sector exists. Bear with me here. My computer is I've had computer. It's a miracle I'm here at all today. I think what we have been, COVID-19 is a huge disruptor within study abroad, the industry, and there isn't an individual stakeholder that isn't now wondering, how does my position look like? What does my organization look like in 5 or 6 months' time, or a year's time, or 2 years' time, or whatever it is? And there's two ways to look at everything in life, but particularly from the prism of study abroad, we can look at things negatively and we can look at things positively. And as a program consultancy, we are kind of close to grassroots. We are connecting the visions of senior administrators and lead faculty, and we are building and molding international experiences, in-person international experiences that's relevant to what they're looking for. And I think there's 3 things to note about it, and it behooves us all to think about this, that we have to try and look on the positive and the silver lining of what is happening right now. It's given us a time to be able to stop and contemplate, are we doing things correctly? Just because we've been doing them this way doesn't necessarily mean that this is the right way for us to do it, to continue to do so. I think it behooves all of us not to come out the other side of COVID-19, the same organization with the same policy, the same procedure, and the same offering that we did when we came in. And I think the last thing that I would like to say just in start is to say, I think that this industry lives and dies by the passion of the staff that are delivering and molding and envisaging new and innovative ways to deliver programming. And one of the things that I've really felt in my heart in the last 6 weeks, as I've been staying in contact with partners, is the real grief that frontline administrators are feeling, that staff are feeling, that students are feeling, for the loss of this global experience on a huge basis. But I also applaud them in terms of what's happened and the fact that we've stood up and we're saying, okay, well, how are we going to counteract these? So what I want to talk a little bit about is the pressures that each of the individual stakeholders are feeling, because I think right now the way for us to get through this is to harness the relationships that we have and to back each other up. And to know the best way to do that is to have a better understanding of the different pressures that both within our organization, the different layers of management are feeling, but then also the different stakeholders within study abroad. So universities, so host organizations, so third-party providers, those types of things. They're all feeling similar, but maybe slightly different pressures. And these are the things that we have to understand as we go through this. So when we're looking at our university partners, and we run a podcast as well, looking at the effects of COVID-19 in the industry. And so it's been really interesting over the last 5 or 6 weeks to speak to our partners and hear what we're looking at. And mostly when we're talking with senior level administrators, the pressures that they're feeling are the total shutdown of their programs, things like missing departmental and institutional internationalization goals, and how do they prime the machine thereafter, in a post-COVID world with goalposts changed. They have a pressure to look for alternative solution in the immediate, and what does it look like afterwards? They're looking at loss of earnings, they're looking at refunds, having punched huge holes in their budgets, disgruntled staff, disgruntled students, parents ringing in. These are everyday things at the moment, and we're hoping that they're working through it and they're seeing light at the end of the tunnel. But I think for those of you that maybe have a boss that is slightly less flexible than usual, cut them some slack. This is the things that they're going through. In terms of those frontline administrators, those advisors, they're disheartened. These are the people that spend many more hours than they're paid to developing these types of programmings. They're on the front line with students. They are now turned into grief counselors. One of the outputs of COVID-19 is the many hundreds of thousands, millions across the world of students that have been really looking forward to a life-changing experience, be it something like a 10-day short-term Maymester program or a full summer semester or their first international internship, those types of things. Many people have come into that decision-making committee, and people have contributed to the costs and those types of things. So they're going through this grief, and what we're finding with frontline study abroad advisors is that they are not trained counselors, and all they can do is listen, as I said at the top of my chat, and provide whatever makes sense to them at the time in terms of this kind of counseling piece. but also they're stressed for their own positions, the furlough, the redundancy situation in their own institution. They're not sure what's going on, and they don't know what the future holds for them. And that's a difficult thing to maintain your enthusiasm for your work. And that's what this industry survives on. And to stay emotionally invested in their programming and looking forward to next year. What we're finding now with institutions is we have this strange situation whereby we're having our usual conversation now 12, 18 months out about building programs for next year with that large uncertainty about whether there is going to be a next year in study abroad. You know, our feeling is that with most of our partners, what we've looked at is that they have called it up to August, and they're looking at fall at the moment. Is it happening? Is it not happening? And they're assuming that 2021 from January onwards is going to go. Do we know if that's the right solution at this stage? No, we don't. But that's where we're at. Pressures that students are facing, they're quite simply distraught. Their dreams are gone. They've been dashed. Who knows what? Certainly, you know, a lot of maybe underrepresented student, first-gen, low-income students have gone through a huge process to try and get to this, both emotionally, saving money, those types of things. It takes a lot of courage to get there, and then suddenly it's whipped from under you, and you wonder, will they have the chance to be able to go again? These are the things that we're going through. A lot of them are stressed about progression. Students they need a study abroad credit, they need an internship credit, they need some kind of credit that we're going to take this summer, and that's no longer there for them. And what does that mean in terms of their progression to graduation and those types of things? And even outside of universities, you know, this industry is not just institution to institution. There's a big role for third-party providers like GoCulture, like Learn International, like many others. And the pressures that they're feeling in terms of keeping their head above water. There are a lot of staff that have been furloughed, that have been laid off, those types of things, and a continuity of service for partnerships, maintaining those relationships. One thing I think that is really important, certainly as a provider for service learning programs, we do quite a lot of, is that the far-reaching knock-on of this, and I'm aware at the moment I'm speaking a lot about negatives, but I just want people to, you know, kind of trying to open up the realization that there are different pressures at different levels, and then also different pressures from different stakeholders. And one of the things that we're feeling that's becoming very stressful for us is that host communities and host providers and fourth party that we work with in delivering our programs are feeling the knock-on effect. We specifically work with a lot of second tier urban areas and also smaller rural communities down to, you know, 200-300 people. And they have their own particular social issues, but our model is a sustainable model to leave behind money within the regions that are needing as most. And as we build out programs, we may come with a 12-week program, we may come with a 6-week program, and the communities are expecting this to come, the investment and the money that's left behind, and that connection between institution in the States and community, wherever that might be outside of the States, is now gone for this year. And that has left a hole on many levels there. An example, we work with a large program where we are the only provider that works with the refugee center in Galway City, and we provide summer programming for them. We also work with autism areas and elderly, and it is one of those knock-on effects that is being felt, but maybe not necessarily realized across the industry. So again, I go back to the fact that the way we get through this is realizing these pressures and coming together to help each other and support our way through it. So what are colleges doing in terms of mitigation of these types of things? So on a senior level, obviously the financial piece is something that is going to be a major issue. So working with your providers, working with your partners, and looking at innovative and flexible ways in terms of refunds, looking at voucher systems, looking at a shift from one program to another. Possibly, we have programs that we were running in-person internships and shifting to an online model, and looking at what that means in terms of refunds and those types of things, so that there's a recognition that there's pressures on both sides, but together we're going to get through this stronger. Things like that. Other things, what we're finding now is, obviously, given what's happened at the moment, there is this renewed focus on all things online, virtual experiences, virtual exchange, virtual internships. And what we're finding is that a lot of institutions do not necessarily have a full institutional policy in regards to this. It's a faculty to faculty piece, it's a department to department piece, but it's not one cohesive policy. So if this is what's happening in your institution, what we need to do is again look at the silver lining. We have time now. We might not necessarily want the time in this instance, but we have the time. And now is the time to be looking at these virtual experience audits. So if you're one of the institutions that doesn't have this, then it's about reaching out across the institution to departments, to faculty, and saying, who is doing this and how are you doing it and what platform are you using? And so find out what's happening within your institutions at the moment, and that forms the bedrock for you to understand what competence is within your institutions, and then look at forming a committee, a virtual exchange committee, which has resource and funding and has a remit and deadlines set behind that in terms of a institutional competency within virtual exchange, because it has been with us for many years, but a lot of institutions have not got to the point that they have really embraced it on a full institutional level, and now is the time to do that. In terms of mitigation at a study abroad level, I mentioned earlier that grief counselling is something that is becoming a major issue for students. How do they unpack this grief? How do they move forward? And a lot of advisors are feeling difficult. Opening up and connecting college counselling services with study abroad and delivering that service together, or providing a pathway for students to go to predetermined seminars and unpacking sessions is something I think that can be helpful, and a lot of our partners are doing. And also, I think from the point of view of the stress within the staff, being open and honest with them. What is happening with staff? What are your plans for staffing within study abroad for the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, those types of things. People need to be able to know this so that they have their life outside of work, they can work through it. These are things that are very important. Some of the things I found really interesting in the podcast that we've been chatting through as we've been talking to people all across the world at all levels is the things that teams are doing in terms of remote and keeping that team spirit together. I've actually found that there has been more kind of innovation in terms of that team spirit piece than there maybe has in the work processes piece. I would read into that how you will. But speaking with Angel Palumbo from NAU just a couple of days ago, and they have a weekly team quiz. They have team happy hours. Ourselves in Learn International, what we did in terms of keeping a structure of a day is that we start our day here in Ireland at 9 o'clock. And the first half hour in the day is a get to know each other session. Absolutely no work is talked about. And we spend just kind of shooting the breeze with our colleagues. And if we have a problem with that, we actually nominate a day of a week that one staff member has a question. So, what was the food that you guys didn't like when you were growing up? These types of things. And it's brought this amazing kind of a mixture and an understanding of who these colleagues are outside of work. And we feel closer now than we did when we started, which is just the real irony, I think, of COVID-19 in general. We've also started a staff blog, which has actually turned out just being a way of processing what every one of our staff members is feeling, and it's you will find it on our website at learninternational.ie, and it just gives an insight into what people are feeling. And what are people doing in terms of the students? So this is all about the students and their experience. Providing a way for them to be able to, as I say, unpack and look at their debrief. I was speaking with engineering in the University of Florida the other day, and they have a coffee hour, a virtual coffee hour once a week that students are free to drop into if they want to, with no particular remit. It's really just a chat. And allowing them then to express what their concerns are in an open and friendly atmosphere, and that seems to be working quite well for them. And just about listening to students, allowing them a space to vent. One or two of our partners have spoken about the fact that they're feeling, students maybe have lost out on money, those types of things. They're feeling these feelings. They don't know how to really express it. And actually providing these sessions and these webinars allows the students to vent, but it's not necessarily focused at study abroad offices or universities, those that means they just want to be heard. That's all they want. And then afterwards, ensuring that you're reaching out to each and every one of the students that were supposed to travel this semester or this summer or wherever it is, and listening to their individual story. Again, listening to their story. You know, what did it take for you to get to where you are now? What's happening with you in terms of your progression? Let's find a pathway for you to, first of all, graduate in case there's issues, and then second of all, let's get you overseas, or let's incorporate this intercultural piece. Let's go talk to GoCulture, and let's get you set up with one of their programs so that we can work towards that. And so then you feel that it's a positive piece. The student leaves, even though they're still at home and they're only doing it on a virtual basis, they're feeling that, okay, we're moving forward, and it's that positivity that I think is really important. And lastly, I think it's about faculty. Okay, yes. A lot of study abroad. Terri, I wasn't going to forget about them. You could never forget about faculty. You know, they are the drivers of so many programs that would never happen if it wasn't for their passion. And so they themselves will be obviously disappointed. There's a huge amount of administrative input into developing faculty-led programs. And so for them, I think, again, the same thing is reaching out to them and saying, okay, what is your situation? Can we shift this program next year? Do you have personal availability? Oh, you don't have availability in the first 2 weeks of May. Well, what about doing a winter program? Or let's shorten it and do a spring break program or something like that. It fits in within your institutional parameters. And so that you're providing them with these options. I think I'd like to give a shout out to that academic community, because I know that many of them have shifted their courses online in a matter of weeks, which is just a gargantuan task. And I think that if we all hadn't have seen COVID coming and suggested, hey guys, any chance you could shift your summer courses online over a 3-week period, I doubt we would like to. I don't think I could actually iterate what the response would be here in this forum, but it did happen, and it's amazing. And I think it's important, again, to keep this positivity piece happening. I'm nearly finished. So I think, you know, there's two different things that are happening now. There's this short-term solution that is required over the next 4, 5, 6 months in terms of this gap that these students are filling, these institutions are filling. What are institutions doing? Well, they're looking at shifting across from in-person programs to anything that can be delivered in terms of a remote piece. Virtual internships are widely available at this stage. They were not widely available about 2 months ago. And I think a lot of providers, us included, have shifted across. And what you're shifting from is this in-person mobility piece to a project-based international competence program, essentially. And this is something that will feed into longer-term institutional goals. They're also looking at virtual experiences. We're working with a program at George Mason University, which is an international arts management program. And this was essentially coming to Ireland and speaking to you know, stakeholders within the arts management area in Ireland. And now what we have is moved it online. Students will take it online, and we have a series of webinars from those individual contributors in Ireland that are coming online to deliver their expertise that way. And then lastly, something a little bit more integrated is this virtual exchange piece, you know, the example being the Coyle Institute in the State University of New York, or anybody who has been on the Erasmus Plus virtual exchange website. There's a lot of good material there and a lot of good videos, and it's all open and free for everybody to see. Plus individual providers that maybe centrally facilitate individual students coming into international group project work. And I think that there is a space for this in the immediate. But I think what's more important is for us to be thinking, again, we cannot be the same institutions, we cannot be the same organizations on the other side of COVID-19 that we are at the moment. And so we have to look at this disruption of the sector as a silver lining piece. We have to look at the fact that, you know, the USP that maybe some of the study abroad programs are using as a sales tool for students to come and study in your university as distinct to another one. What does the breakdown of study abroad mean for that? Well, we have to stand up and move on to the next iteration of study abroad. And that means that while in the interim, there is this, you know, mutually exclusive replacement of virtual for in-person. In the long term, it is mutually dependent. So what we're looking at, everybody is aware of the term of the global citizen, and this is the likes of GoCulture and Justin are really feeding into building global citizens. But now what we're going to have is this connection of the two, which I like to call globally competent techno-citizens. And so this is it's something like an example of a 4-stage process where you're integrating something like GoCulture's program on campus in the first instance, working towards a virtual exchange or a virtual experience project work with international students in varying countries, working then on step 3 into an actual mobility where students are going in both directions. And then fourth, again, back to the likes of GoCulture or others, unpacking the experience and reflecting. And this as a whole is a seamless process that brings in both in-person competency and also online competency, which we know now that the 21st century graduates and all of our institutions want to be pushing out not only globally competent graduates, but also technically competent graduates. And the opportunity for study abroad now is to be front-facing in that kind of march towards this new graduate.
Absolutely,
I think
that's great.
I think that's about it. I just want to say thanks so much, Terri, for facilitating. Sorry if I took a little bit more time than
no worries. I mean, luckily we had a little extra time, but because we lost our third participant. But I know if Lanice Agri were here, she would raise the issue. Well, first of all, you already talked about faculty. And I think that's one of the most important things we need to keep in mind is that we have to keep faculty engaged. You know, one of the points somebody raised was that, you know, how basically study abroad international programs may be a target for budget cuts. And I know in the past they have been, but I think one of the ways to push against that is to get faculty engaged and involved and say, look, you know, it's not just about study abroad and the students, it's also about the faculty. You know, the faculty you know, need to step up and help to explain why these programs are so important. But also, you know, one of the big things I really focused on when I was working with our study abroad program at UT Austin was access, and for students, low-income students, students who might not be considered, you know, the traditional study abroad targets. And, you know, actually some of this work we're talking about now has already been coming into play because of students who may not be able to, you know, afford study abroad, even though we can provide scholarships and so on, or don't have time in their schedules to study abroad. And so that's why I think this is a really good time to be, you know, rethinking the way we approach, you know, cultural competency and these types of topics, because we want to make sure that every student has access to these experiences. And I love the idea of like international group projects, you know, developing relationships with, and that's why I think collaboration is key. You know, developing relationships with institutions abroad that, you know, and I should mention, we're having an international moment now because we're talking to somebody in Ireland. So this is not that difficult to do, folks. But I know you guys all know that, but, you know, finding ways to connect students in ways that we haven't focused on as much in the past. I think we've had a very traditional approach to study abroad, and that's great, but there's just going to be less. I think the resources that are going towards study abroad we're going to decline regardless. And so things like GoCulture, things like these developing international relationships that we can utilize to develop more, you know, online types of engagement, I think are going to be important. So in any case, Chris, there was a question for you I wanted to come back to, which I think you know, is a very interesting one. And what do you predict for consolidation, mergers, acquisitions, and liquidations of various organizations in the study abroad provider industry?
Okay, that's one hell of a question. What do I
Yes,
predict for that? There is no doubt that we will see closures in the not too distant future. I think that's a fait accompli at this stage. I think certainly when we look at ourselves, you know, we're relatively lucky in that we have a flexibility. I mentioned at the front end that we're a smaller provider, we're a boutique provider, and the way we work on a global basis is through a series of networks of partners that are similar to ourselves. So this is kind of a co-petition model rather than a competition model. We're stronger together. And I think we'll see a lot more of that happening. One of the things that I have, I suppose, I feel sorry saying this, but I take a little bit of solace from is that everybody is feeling the same issues. And so while we may not have as many overheads as some of the larger providers, and then vice versa, everybody is hit at the same institution. So I think the real issue is going to be not maybe in the next 2 or 3 months, you know, I mean, suppose getting to what we would all agree to be the other side of COVID, it's the tail end afterwards. And so while maybe skies will open and universities and programs will open again, the concern that I would have is the confidence within the marketplace, and that being, you know, that decision-making committee, the parents, the guardians, the other friends and family that go into the decision as to whether somebody is going to go overseas for the first time or the 10th time, it doesn't matter. The question is, do we feel confident that they can go and travel to South Africa, or they can travel to Australia, or to Japan, or Ireland, or wherever it is? And yes, there'll be different competences in different areas, but in general, it's that tail end that I think is going to be the piece that really, unfortunately, I think kills off a number of organizations. I think what you'll see is that you have, you know, every second, I know this well, every second week, there are multiple new providers. That may not necessarily happen now, but the area or the provider sector is characterized by maybe 10 to 15 large brands. And I think what you will see is those that are have a cash surplus, something to sit on, will be able to find bargains and to bring in capacity in areas that they maybe traditionally haven't really looked at, but they're interested in. I think you'll see the larger institutions looking to strengthen their virtual online competencies, and to try and kind of corner the market in that regard, I would imagine. So it's an exciting time, it's a worrying time, but I think the only way to confront it is to stand up and move forward and say, well, we are going to choose this strategy. We've looked at what our situation is. These are our partners. We're listening to them. They're listening to us, and we can see that this is the way forward. Outside of that, I find it difficult to think otherwise. But definitely, I think we'll see quite a number of closures pre-Christmas, and then I think we'll probably see just pre-Christmas and after Christmas mergers starting to happen. You know, I suppose flirting conversations and what have you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I had posted in the chat, and for those of you who haven't checked out the chat yet, please do and put your questions there, is this idea of, so obviously virtual learning opportunities are going to be critical going forward, but also advocating for study abroad and international learning opportunities. And Chris, I'm wondering, you know, how you feel about developing. I mean, I'm wondering if any of the larger organizations like NAFSA and so on are, you know, interested in helping to develop a working group that would help to, you know, working with organizations like yours to help develop some ideas around virtual learning online, you know, talking about challenges study abroad is facing. I mean, we certainly have a platform if we can, you know, help folks through that process.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I think there are a lot of segmented, separate, autonomous conversations going on within individual networks, personal networks, and what have you. I've been party to a few of them, but I still am waiting to see that one real leader in the industry coming out and occupying that space and saying, okay, here we are. This is, we're going to facilitate this. I don't think it's happened yet. Right. I think there's a space for that, you know?
Yeah,
so it's an interesting point.
I agree, because I'm seeing that more broadly in higher ed, that there's there hasn't really been somebody, taking, I mean, we're trying to step up through these webinars and so on, but I think we do need to, and we would love to get all of you engaged so that we could create that space where folks can come. I mean, that's the whole purpose of why we created the Center for Higher Education Leadership and are doing these webinars. We wanted to create a space where people can come together and discuss these issues. So, I mean, that's something we can certainly explore. And if you're interested in that, please, I know you guys are already connected with us, but we would love to create a forum for you guys to get together and keep this an ongoing discussion. For example, Tracy has a handful of videos on intercultural competencies. GoCulture has some great stuff on intercultural competency, but we need to figure out ways to share this information. And it's really interesting because actually right at the beginning of all of this with the coronavirus and COVID-19, I was tracking all of these ways that people were, so the way I described it, we've kind of gone in waves in terms of what people are focused on with the crisis. And initially it was just getting online, period. And for study abroad, it was getting people home. and now people are starting to, we're past that immediate crisis point, and now people are starting to realize, oh, wait a second, what are we going to do for next year? Study abroad has to be planning things out for the next 3 years at least. And so I think part of the reason we haven't seen that consolidation yet is we're just now starting to think through these scenarios and like, well, wait a second, if I'm a dean or a provost, it's like, I got these faculty who are signed up to teach abroad next year, do I shift those courses back home? Do I cancel them? All of those kinds of things. And I'm sure we could get a really good discussion going. So, but we will send a note out to everybody and just let people know that we do have a forum available. And let me go back to this question from Sheeman, thinking in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, students are currently mentally, emotionally exhausted and have technology fatigue. To any of the presenters, do you think our role in the short term should be to take a step back from our agenda and figure out how to support the basic needs of higher education and our students? Or professionally, should we go full steam ahead to prove how innovative we can be, even if students, faculty, and staff are just not at that place mentally or emotionally at this time? Or is it a delicate balance of both? I have an answer, but Chris, I'll let you go first.
Okay, that's a mouthful, but I like the sentiment behind it, and I think I really think there's no one definite answer to that. My personal feeling is that I think again, it's really important to try and see a silver lining and to embrace what good there can come out of the crisis that we're in at the moment. And for me and for our organization, it's provided us space. It's provided us a situation where there's a pause button. And I dread looking back on this and not having reflected and not having said, okay, for once we could slow down a little bit and we could really look at ourselves objectively and say, is this where we're at? So I don't think that necessarily the two are separate when you're saying stand up and march ahead. I think you need to have time to reflect in order to be able to strategize on what it is that you are going to do in terms of blazing a trail. And things that, for example, I was just noting there, that other things I would be suggesting people look at now is that without doubt, from a practical level, there's going to have to be a review of internal policy, brief on policy, repatriation, insurance, all of those types of things. And that takes a lot of time. And so I think now we have the time to be able to do that. I agree with you, Terri. I think maybe the reason that we haven't really seen the stronger conversations coming is that people are really just coming out of the fog and the mayhem of, how do we to bring students home? How do we make refunds? How do we plan for whatever is to come? So I think that's an important thing. And something else I think is important is that ultimately, I think increasingly, we're trying to not necessarily convince, but we're trying to show students a path towards towards study abroad and a reason to study abroad. A certain cohort of students are really just gung-ho for graduation and get out in the workplace and those types of things and don't necessarily see the benefit of it. And so we need tools to be able to do that. And there's no better tool than one student speaking about their experience that they had and how that changed their life. At Learn International, when we started, part of the reason we started our podcast was to be able to speak at this multi-level, to speak to the students that are graduated now and have been studying abroad. And so if your institutions haven't recorded these things, now is the time to reach out to your alumni. Now is the time to reach out to those that have just studied abroad and to record that in video blog or regular blog or a webinar or whatever it is. And this is gold. This stuff is what other students that are finding it difficult to pull the trigger on whether they want to study abroad or not need to hear. And we rarely have the time and effort to space to be able to do that. So I think it's a long-winded answer, but I think we shouldn't stand up and go. I think we need to take 4 or 5 months, the summer, whatever it is in your own instances, but use that time to reflect and then to plan what your strategy is going to be from there on out. I think it would be a shame not to at least embrace the space that we've been given.
Yeah, I agree. And I just a reminder, we are recording this presentation, and I'm going to ask very nicely if Chris and just so people know, Justin, we have Justin and Chris today. Actually, I'll leave that there again. If you guys wouldn't mind writing up just a quickie paragraph on your thoughts, we would love to share that with our group and maybe have that be a launching point for our forum page where we'll start this discussion. So we'll share the recording, but we'll also provide some other materials. I have a coronavirus resource page, but I'll pull that into the forum as well, so folks have access to some of the things I've been collecting around study abroad issues and international. I know a lot of times study abroad offices are commingled with international student offices. So we only, I can't believe it, we only have 3 minutes left. Oh my goodness. So we don't have a lot of time for our last few questions, but let me go through, that last one was a long question, but I think it's a really important one because I know that my first thought is always to what are the immediate needs, but like I said, I agree. I do think we're now at a point where we can do both. We need to think about the students' immediate needs, but if we aren't planning for the future and thinking, about what we need to be doing for the next few years, really, then it's going to be problematic. We can't get caught flat-footed. We have to think through all the scenarios. And actually, I'll post these on our resource page. For example, Brian Alexander, who was on our first webinar, is a futurist and professor at Georgetown who has really thought through carefully some of these scenarios. I know somebody else posted on, I don't know who wrote it, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet, that there are 15 scenarios for next year. There are a lot of scenarios, but for the last question, from my friend Helena, why would students pay for virtual learning if a professor can do that without the help of a study abroad provider? I mean, I think the answer is the quality of what the professor offers is going to be a lot better if they get support from the study abroad office, from a provider. But Chris, I'll let you answer that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it really is the same situation that you have when you have in-person experience. A professor is not necessarily fully versed within a culture themselves. They may have lived, if they were going to Italy, they may have lived there for 6 months or studied there themselves. But their ability to impart this comes from their own underlying knowledge and their own experience. And what we're seeing, for example, I'll go back to the arts management program with George Mason that we're doing, is that there are certain knowledge sets, competencies, cultural pieces that are just not possible to impart unless you are from the actual country itself or organized or within an organization. For example, Galway was the City of Culture in Europe this year, and we're looking at the director or assistant director coming in and speaking about their experience and what COVID means and what knock-on effect that has had. And the knowledge within that piece is just not possible. From a cultural perspective, we may be Skyping into a far northwestern Ireland village and talking about language and talking about preservation of culture there, and the issues that outbound migration of youth are holding, and rural health issues and those types of things. And that's just something that is much richer when you're speaking to somebody with the accent, with the language, living and breathing in the country that they're in. And so I think there is a fairly widespread understanding that, you know, this online piece is not a full replacement for this in-person mobility, but in the absence of it, in the short term, the ability to Skype or Zoom somebody from across the world into your classroom and benefit from their, I suppose, cultural knowledge and their professional knowledge, whatever it is that the class is doing, it can really brighten up a classroom and really augment the underlying course.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap up, but this is not the end of this discussion, and I really, really appreciate Justin and Chris's time today. Thanks to everybody who has joined in. And we just really want to help you guys as much as we can. We do have free memberships that if you just want to get into our forums on Shell, but we also need members, because we can't, just like you guys can't survive without financial support, we can't survive without financial support. So we really appreciate if you will consider taking a look at our membership. We have a lot to offer, not just these webinars. And I really do want to send my heartfelt and most sincere thoughts to everybody who's dealing with the virus. I know my family has been touched by it, not my immediate family, but I have cousins and so on. And so I really hope that everybody stays healthy and is, of course, thinking about your immediate needs first. But there's a lot to think about here. And like I said, we will continue this discussion. And I'm putting Chris and Justin on the spot by saying we will pull together some material to share with you guys. But I think this is a really, really important topic, and I just haven't seen a whole lot out there that really pulls it together in this way. So again, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, and greetings to Ireland.
Thanks, Terri.
We'll be talking. Thanks a lot. Take care.
See you, folks. Thanks.
Bye-bye.